Welcome to Forgotten Civilization, where we journey deep into the hidden corners of human history, exploring the mysteries, legends, and forgotten truths that continue to shape our understanding of the past. Across every continent, buried beneath sand, stone, and sea, lie stories of civilizations both real and imagined. But among these tales, one stands taller than the rest, a name that has echoed through millennia with equal parts fascination and controversy: Atlantis. Was it the pinnacle of a lost civilization, a sophisticated society wiped away by cataclysm? Or was it simply an allegory crafted by one of history's greatest philosophers? Tonight, we embark on a journey that will attempt to peel back the layers of myth, philosophy, archaeology, and science to uncover what lies at the heart of the Atlantis story. The tale of Atlantis begins, as so many of history's great mysteries do, with the writings of Plato. Around 360 BCE, Plato composed two dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias. It is within these texts that the story of Atlantis first emerges. According to Plato, Atlantis was no ordinary tale. He did not present it as myth nor as poetry, but as a serious historical account, a record passed down through generations. He claimed that his ancestor Solon, one of Athens's great lawgivers, had traveled to Egypt a century earlier. There, Egyptian priests supposedly told him of a vast and powerful empire that had existed 9,000 years before Solon's time, placing Atlantis more than 11,000 years in the past from our modern perspective. The priests described a mighty island, larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined, situated beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. This island nation was rich in resources, fertile in soil, and unmatched in naval power. Its kings ruled not just the island itself, but a dominion that stretched deep into Europe and North Africa. Yet, in a pattern that would later become central to the legend, the Atlanteans grew corrupt. Initially noble and virtuous, they became greedy, arrogant, and oppressive. Their ambition led them into conflict with the free peoples of the Mediterranean, and it was the city of Athens, still young and small in this legendary time, that rose in resistance. Against overwhelming odds, Athens triumphed, repelling the Atlantean invasion. But divine justice, Plato tells us, was not long in coming. The gods, angered by Atlantis's hubris, unleashed destruction upon the island. In a single day and night of catastrophe, earthquakes and floods consumed Atlantis, plunging it beneath the waves of the Atlantic Ocean, never to be seen again. This account, as written by Plato, is brief but incredibly evocative. In Timaeus, the story is mentioned only in passing, almost as a prelude to larger discussions of cosmology and the nature of the universe. It is in Critias that Plato expands upon it, describing in greater detail the structure of Atlantis, its concentric rings of land and water, its grand temples and palaces, and the laws established by its first kings, said to be descendants of the god Poseidon himself. Yet even Critias is incomplete. The dialogue breaks off abruptly, leaving scholars for centuries to wonder whether Plato had intended to continue the tale, or whether the missing portions were lost to history. What makes Atlantis so enduring is not simply its description, but the way Plato framed it. He was not writing mythology in the traditional Greek sense. He placed the Atlantis account within a dialogue of serious philosophical inquiry, giving it the air of authenticity. By attributing the story to Solon and the Egyptian priests, he tied it to respected historical figures and civilizations known for their wisdom and record-keeping. This gave the tale a veneer of credibility that set it apart from purely fantastical stories. Yet even at the time, questions arose. Was Plato recounting a genuine historical memory, preserved through oral tradition and Egyptian records? Or was he constructing a moral allegory, a cautionary tale designed to illustrate the dangers of arrogance, imperial overreach, and the corruption of power? Many scholars argue that Atlantis was a vehicle for Plato's philosophy, an illustration of his ideas about the ideal state, justice, and divine retribution. But others, across history, have taken him at his word, believing that somewhere beneath oceans or deserts, the ruins of Atlantis await discovery. From the moment Plato set pen to papyrus, Atlantis became more than just a story, it became a mirror. To some, it reflected the achievements and failures of ancient civilizations. To others, it was a puzzle, a mystery to be solved, a challenge left by the ancients to test the ingenuity of future generations. And to still others, it became a myth of paradise lost, a symbol of human longing for a golden age that slipped beneath the waves. Plato's account is tantalizingly detailed in some respects, yet frustratingly vague in others. He describes Atlantis as lying beyond the pillars of Heracles, but he does not give precise coordinates. He speaks of an advanced naval power, yet the specifics of its ships, weapons, or technologies are glossed over. He details the geography of its capital city, with its concentric circles of land and water connected by bridges and canals, but he leaves us no maps. It is this blend of specificity and ambiguity that has allowed Atlantis to endure across centuries, concrete enough to fuel theories, vague enough to resist confirmation. As we continue this journey, we will examine not only what Plato said, but also how his words have been interpreted, debated, and transformed across cultures and centuries. We will explore the civilizations that may have inspired his vision, the geological events that could have given rise to the cataclysm, and the way Atlantis has persisted as both a legend and a cultural symbol. But it all begins here, with Plato's dialogues, with a tale told around 360 BCE that continues to echo, challenge, and inspire us more than 2,000 years later. To understand Atlantis, we must step beyond the story itself and enter the world in which it was first told. Plato did not write in a vacuum. He lived in Athens during the 4th century BCE, a city recovering from both its golden age and the humiliations of war. Just a few decades earlier, Athens had reached extraordinary heights, home to philosophers like Socrates, dramatists like Sophocles, architects who raised the Parthenon, and statesmen who oversaw a democratic experiment unique in the ancient world. But by Plato's lifetime, Athens had also endured devastating defeat in the Peloponnesian War, internal strife, and the loss of empire. It was a city reflecting on its greatness and on its failures. Plato himself was a product of this turbulent context. Born into an aristocratic family around 427 BCE, he was only a young man when Athens surrendered to Sparta in 404 BCE. He saw firsthand the fragility of political systems, the dangers of demagogues, and the cycles of rise and fall that characterized Greek city-states. The execution of his teacher Socrates in 399 BCE left a profound mark on him, convincing Plato that Athens, despite its democratic claims, was deeply flawed. He spent much of his life searching for philosophical truths that might guide humanity toward a more just and lasting order. It is within this broader intellectual project that the Atlantis story emerges. Plato's dialogues often blend myth and philosophy, using fictional or semi-historical conversations as vehicles for deeper truths. In Republic, for example, he imagines an ideal city ruled by philosopher kings. In Phaedrus, he crafts myths about the soul and the afterlife. Myths, for Plato, were not mere entertainment. They were tools, ways of dramatizing ideas too complex or abstract to be conveyed by logic alone. The story of Atlantis, as presented in Timaeus and Critias, fits this pattern. On the surface, it is a historical account, passed down from Solon's Egyptian encounter. But beneath the surface, it reflects Plato's central concerns: the fragility of human virtue, the dangers of unchecked power, and the inevitability of decline when hubris overtakes wisdom. Atlantis, in this interpretation, is not simply a lost island, it is a parable of empire. For Athenians of Plato's time, this theme carried immediate resonance. They had seen their own city rise to unmatched power during the 5th century BCE, extending influence across the Aegean and building the Delian League into something resembling an empire. They had also seen it fall, humbled by Sparta and torn apart by civil strife. To cast Atlantis as an imperial power undone by its own arrogance was, in many ways, to cast a shadow of Athens itself. Yet by making ancient Athens the noble victor against Atlantis, Plato also offered a kind of redemption, a vision of the city not as it was in his troubled age, but as it could be in its highest form, courageous, virtuous, and chosen by the gods to preserve freedom against tyranny. This duality, critique and aspiration, lies at the heart of Plato's political philosophy. He used Atlantis not just to warn against hubris, but also to inspire. By situating the story in a mythical past, he placed it beyond the constraints of verifiable history, allowing it to function on a symbolic level. Atlantis was both real and not real, history and allegory, a place one might seek in the physical world, but also a mirror held up to the human soul. It is also important to remember that Plato was not alone in using catastrophic myths. The Greeks were heirs to a long tradition of flood stories, tales of civilizations wiped out by divine judgment. In Hesiod's Works and Days, we hear of the 5 ages of man, each successive age declining from the Golden Age to the corrupt Iron Age. In the myths of Deucalion and Pyrrha, a flood wipes out humanity, leaving only a virtuous pair to repopulate the earth. These stories spoke to a deep cultural awareness that civilizations rise and fall, and that human arrogance often precedes disaster. Plato's Atlantis fit neatly into this tradition, yet with a sophistication and philosophical framing that elevated it above mere myth. The use of Egypt as a source in the story is also telling. For the Greeks, Egypt represented antiquity, wisdom, and continuity. By claiming that Solon had learned of Atlantis from Egyptian priests, Plato linked his tale to a civilization that, in Greek eyes, seemed timeless and authoritative. Whether or not Solon ever heard such a story is secondary. What mattered was the weight of tradition, the suggestion that Atlantis was not a Greek invention, but a memory preserved from a more ancient and venerable culture. Through this lens, Atlantis becomes less about geography and more about morality. It is a mirror of human society, a tale designed to illustrate how even the mightiest powers can fall if they lose sight of virtue. It also reflects Plato's larger metaphysical worldview, that the visible world is but a shadow of eternal truths, and that myths can guide us toward understanding those truths. Still, the tension remains. Plato framed the story with such detail and apparent sincerity that many throughout history have taken it literally. Was he playing a philosophical game? Or was he transmitting a genuine fragment of historical memory? Scholars remain divided, and perhaps that ambiguity was intentional. After all, the power of Atlantis lies precisely in its ability to occupy both spaces at once, the realm of allegory and the realm of history. As we reflect on the Greek context, one thing becomes clear. Atlantis was not simply a lost island to Plato. It was a symbol of human potential and human folly, a lesson wrapped in narrative form. But as the centuries unfolded, readers and thinkers would wrestle with the same question. Was this simply philosophy, or a clue to something real, buried beneath oceans or deserts, waiting to be uncovered? That debate would become one of the most enduring legacies of Plato's work, carrying the name of Atlantis far beyond Athens, across time and into the modern world. Plato's account of Atlantis is brief compared to the vast body of speculation it has inspired, but within his words lies a surprisingly detailed portrait of this fabled civilization. Though incomplete, his descriptions provide the foundation upon which centuries of imagination and inquiry have been built. To approach Atlantis seriously, we must carefully reconstruct what he said about its geography, architecture, and technology, those tantalizing fragments that have fueled theories from the Renaissance to the present day. According to Critias, Atlantis was an immense island, greater in size than Libya and Asia Minor combined, placing it at a scale unimaginable for the known islands of the Mediterranean. Situated beyond the Pillars of Heracles, the location points westward, toward the Atlantic Ocean. This geographical clue has been one of the most debated aspects of the story. Some have argued that it indicates a real island in the mid-Atlantic, while others suggest that Plato used beyond the pillars metaphorically to signify a land distant from Greece and mysterious to the Hellenic world. The island itself was described as extraordinarily fertile, endowed with every resource necessary for a great civilization. Crops grew in abundance, metals were plentiful, including the mysterious orichalcum, a substance prized second only to gold, and forests provided both building materials and wild game. This was no barren rock, but a paradise, a place where nature itself seemed to conspire in favor of human flourishing. Plato painted a picture of a society whose prosperity was matched only by its splendor. At the heart of Atlantis lay its capital, a city built with remarkable symmetry and grandeur. The city was arranged in concentric rings of land and water, alternating in perfect circles. Bridges connected the rings, while canals linked the city to the sea, creating a sophisticated network of waterways that allowed ships to move easily throughout the city. This image of concentric design, orderly, mathematical, harmonious, reflects Plato's philosophical ideals as much as any historical reality. In his vision of the ideal state, order and proportion were key. Atlantis embodied these principles in stone and water. The innermost ring housed the royal palace and the great temple of Poseidon, god of the sea and the legendary progenitor of the Atlantean kings. Plato describes the temple as a wonder of ancient architecture, vast in size, adorned with precious metals, and crowned by a statue of Poseidon driving 6-winged horses, so large that its head nearly touched the ceiling. The temple gleamed with orichalcum, copper, and ivory, capturing the wealth and artistry of the Atlanteans. Here, in this sacred center, politics and religion fused as the kings gathered to deliberate, sacrifice, and renew their bonds of law and loyalty. The city was not merely a religious center but also a hub of engineering and innovation. The Atlanteans were said to have mastered hydraulic systems, channeling water through aqueducts and fountains. Hot and cold springs flowed, supplying both luxury and necessity. Their harbors were filled with ships, and their walls were lined with docks, testifying to their dominance in seafaring and trade. The use of canals for transportation suggests a society highly attuned to infrastructure, capable of planning and executing large-scale projects that rival anything in the ancient Mediterranean. Beyond the capital, the island of Atlantis was divided into districts, each producing its share of goods and resources. The kings ruled collectively, bound by a code inscribed on orichalcum pillars. Each king governed his territory, but all were united under the leadership of the firstborn of Poseidon's line. This federated system of governance reflects a balance between unity and autonomy, again mirroring Plato's political ideals of harmony and proportion. The technology of Atlantis, as Plato described it, has often been a source of fascination for modern readers. While he did not detail advanced machines or futuristic devices, his description suggests a society with engineering capabilities well beyond much of the ancient world. The scale of their canals, the grandeur of their temples, the abundance of resources, and their naval dominance all point to a civilization of immense organizational capacity. Some later interpreters, especially in modern times, have read into this the suggestion of technologies lost to history, electricity, flight, or even nuclear power. While such claims lie outside the scope of Plato's writings, the seeds of that imagination were planted by the richness of his description. Of particular intrigue is the mention of orichalcum, a metal said to cover much of the temple of Poseidon. Scholars have debated what this substance might have been. Some suggest it was a form of brass, an alloy of copper and zinc known in antiquity but rare. Others argue it could have been a mythical metal invented by Plato to symbolize wealth and rarity. The allure of orichalcum lies not only in its mystery, but in its role as a marker of Atlantis's uniqueness, a resource that distinguished it from the rest of the world. The natural environment of Atlantis was also key to its identity. Plato described mountains rich with minerals, fertile plains irrigated by carefully engineered canals, and forests teeming with wildlife. He spoke of elephants roaming the land, suggesting a climate and ecology different from the Mediterranean. Whether these details were intended as literal or symbolic remains debated, but they contribute to the vision of Atlantis as a world apart, a place of abundance that made its downfall all the more tragic. This geography and architecture were not incidental to the story. For Plato, they symbolized harmony, order, and the alignment of human society with natural and divine law. The concentric rings represented balance, the canals represented ingenuity, the temples represented piety. Atlantis was an image of human potential at its greatest height, and yet, in his telling, it was precisely this greatness that bred corruption. Wealth led to arrogance, abundance to greed, power to tyranny. The symmetry of the city concealed the asymmetry of the soul. For modern interpreters, Plato's descriptions have offered both a map and a mystery. Some have taken the geography literally, searching for concentric structures beneath the sea or in remote deserts. Others have read it symbolically, seeing in the rings of Atlantis a metaphor for cosmic harmony or the structure of the ideal state. Archaeologists, geologists, and adventurers alike have pored over these details, trying to separate allegory from reality. And yet the power of the Atlantis story lies precisely in this ambiguity. Plato gave just enough detail to inspire visions of grandeur, but not enough to anchor them in certainty. Was Atlantis a real place, remembered dimly through Egyptian tradition? Was it an allegorical city, a philosophical mirror of Athens' rise and fall? Or was it something in between, a myth rooted in fragments of history, amplified by imagination? The geography, architecture, and technology of Atlantis remain, to this day, one of the great enigmas of antiquity. They are at once specific and elusive, precise and abstract, evocative and indeterminate. They form the backbone of the legend, the image that has haunted the imagination of the West for over 2 millennia. And as we turn from description to interpretation, we step into the vast and varied landscape of theories that have sought to explain the mystery. Where, if anywhere, was Atlantis? For more than 2,000 years, the story of Atlantis has provoked debate not only among poets and dreamers, but among historians, geographers, archaeologists, and scientists. Was it a real civilization, remembered dimly through myth? Was it a moral allegory invented by Plato to serve his philosophical teachings? Or was it something in between, a tale built on fragments of fact, magnified by imagination until it transcended history and became legend? In this section, we explore the major theories that have sought to explain Atlantis, dividing them into historical, geographical, geological, and symbolic interpretations. The earliest explanations of Atlantis were already diverse. Ancient commentators themselves debated whether Plato intended his story as literal truth or allegory. Some, like the philosopher Crantor, who lived a generation after Plato, insisted that the tale was based on Egyptian records and thus grounded in history. Others treated it as a moral fable, designed to contrast the virtuous Athens with the decadent empire of Atlantis. This tension between literal and allegorical readings has defined the Atlantis debate from antiquity to the present. One of the most prominent historical theories associates Atlantis with the island of Crete and the civilization of the Minoans. Flourishing from around 3000 to 1450 BCE, the Minoans were the first great maritime power of the Mediterranean. Their palaces at Knossos, Phaistos, and Akrotiri reveal advanced architecture, complex plumbing systems, and vibrant art, features reminiscent of Plato's description of Atlantis's sophistication. The Minoans controlled extensive trade networks and dominated the Aegean Sea, a naval power whose wealth and culture astonished later Greeks. Yet their civilization collapsed suddenly around 1450 BCE, likely due to a combination of natural disasters and foreign invasions. The most catastrophic of these disasters was the eruption of the volcanic island of Thera, now called Santorini, around 1600 BCE. This was one of the most powerful volcanic events in recorded history, sending shockwaves, tsunamis, and ash clouds across the Aegean. The eruption destroyed much of Thera itself and devastated surrounding islands. Some scholars argue that this disaster, remembered in oral tradition and transmitted through centuries, inspired the core of Plato's Atlantis tale. The concentric rings of Atlantis's capital might even echo the circular caldera left by the eruption. While not identical to Plato's geography, the parallels between the Minoan world and Atlantis are striking. Another major theory places Atlantis not in the Aegean, but in the Atlantic Ocean, taking Plato's words literally when he described it as lying beyond the pillars of Heracles. This interpretation has captivated explorers since antiquity. In the Age of Discovery, when European sailors crossed the Atlantic, many speculated that the Americas themselves were remnants of Atlantis. Some imagined that the Aztec or Maya civilizations were heirs to the Atlanteans, their monumental pyramids echoes of a lost world. While mainstream archaeology rejects such direct connections, the association of Atlantis with the Atlantic remains one of the most enduring ideas. Other proposed locations include Spain, Morocco, the Azores, the Canary Islands, and even Antarctica. Each theory attempts to reconcile Plato's descriptions with geographical reality. For example, Some researchers point to the region of Andalusia in southern Spain, particularly the marshlands of Doñana, as a possible site. Satellite imagery has revealed circular structures beneath the earth there, which some interpret as the remains of concentric cities. Others suggest that ancient seafaring peoples could have reached the Azores, volcanic islands far out in the Atlantic, which might match the description of a distant island destroyed by earthquakes and floods. Geologists and oceanographers have also weighed in. The idea of a continent-sized landmass sinking beneath the sea is implausible according to modern geology. Plate tectonics does not allow for entire continents to vanish suddenly. Landmasses rise and fall over millions of years, not overnight. However, localized catastrophes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, and earthquakes can indeed wipe out coastal cities and islands. In this sense, Atlantis may represent not a lost continent but a memory of catastrophic flooding events that shaped early civilizations. One compelling geological candidate is the flooding of the Black Sea around 5600 BCE. Archaeologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman proposed that rising Mediterranean waters broke through the Bosporus, flooding a fertile basin and displacing Neolithic communities. Such an event could have given rise to flood legends, including Atlantis. Others point to the end of the Ice Age, when rising sea levels inundated coastal settlements worldwide, erasing large portions of humanity's earliest history. In this view, Atlantis may symbolize a collective memory of lost coastal civilizations. Yet another approach interprets Atlantis symbolically, in line with Plato's broader philosophical project. In The Republic and the Laws, Plato emphasized the dangers of wealth, luxury, and imperial ambition. Atlantis, with its immense riches, naval supremacy, and eventual arrogance, serves as a mirror image of Athens. It is a cautionary tale, warning that even the greatest societies are vulnerable to corruption and collapse when they stray from virtue. From this perspective, searching for Atlantis as a physical location misses the point. Its true existence is in the realm of ideas, not geography. Modern pseudoscientific theories have also entered the debate, often with sensational claims. Writers in the 19th and 20th centuries suggested that Atlantis possessed advanced technologies, aircraft, electricity, or even nuclear power, long before recorded history. Some linked Atlantis to extraterrestrials, proposing that it was either a colony of alien visitors or a center of lost wisdom transmitted to later civilizations. While lacking evidence, such theories gained popular appeal, especially as they were amplified by authors like Ignatius Donnelly in the 1800s and later in popular culture, from comic books to films. These ideas reveal less about ancient history and more about modern society's longing for a golden age of lost knowledge. Scientific skepticism has consistently emphasized that no archaeological evidence supports the existence of a continent spanning Atlantis. The Mediterranean world is among the most thoroughly studied regions on Earth, and no traces of such a civilization have been found. What archaeology has revealed instead is the richness of real ancient societies, Minoan, Mycenaean, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, whose achievements were extraordinary in their own right. To anchor Atlantis firmly in one of these known civilizations is to restore the myth to its historical context rather than chase a phantom continent. And yet, the persistence of the Atlantis legend speaks to something deeper than the quest for literal truth. It embodies humanity's fascination with the possibility of lost worlds, civilizations forgotten by time, knowledge buried beneath the waves. It reflects both our awe at nature's destructive power and our anxiety about the fragility of our own societies. Whether as allegory, distorted memory, or speculative geography, Atlantis endures because it asks timeless questions. How do civilizations rise? Why do they fall? And what lessons must we draw to avoid repeating their mistakes? In sum, the theories of Atlantis span a vast spectrum, from rigorous archaeology to speculative fantasy, from symbolic philosophy to scientific geology. Each interpretation, whether literal, metaphorical, or hybrid, tells us as much about the people proposing it as it does about the myth itself. For the historian, the value of Atlantis may lie not in proving its existence, but in understanding the cultural, political, and psychological needs it continues to fulfill. As we move forward, we turn to these very questions of meaning and legacy. Beyond the debates of location and geology, what does Atlantis signify? Why has this story remained so powerful, shaping everything from Renaissance scholarship to modern science fiction? And what does it reveal about humanity's enduring relationship with myth and memory? The enduring power of Atlantis lies not only in its possible historical origins or geological plausibility, but in its profound impact on culture, philosophy, and the collective imagination. Since Plato first penned his dialogues more than 2 millennia ago, the myth of Atlantis has transcended its classical setting, shaping literature, religion, exploration, and even modern popular culture. To understand Atlantis fully, we must examine not just where it may have been, but what it has meant and continues to mean to human societies across history. Plato's original tale already carried immense symbolic weight. In Timaeus and Critias, Atlantis was depicted as a mighty civilization blessed with abundance, ingenuity, and military might. Yet it fell into decadence, arrogance, and aggression, leading to its divine punishment and ultimate destruction. For Plato, Atlantis was not simply a lost city, but a moral allegory, contrasting the corruption of imperial ambition with the virtuous restraint of his idealized Athens. This interpretation highlights Atlantis as a timeless symbol, a civilization undone not by external enemies, but by its own excess and moral decay. In this sense, Atlantis functions as both a warning and a mirror, reflecting humanity's recurring struggles with power, greed, and hubris. In antiquity, however, the story's moral message often blurred with curiosity about its factual basis. Hellenistic scholars speculated about the possible location of Atlantis, while Roman authors echoed themes of fallen empires and lost lands. The idea resonated with myths of other vanished worlds, such as the Golden Age or the lost continent of Hyperborea. Atlantis thus entered the wider tapestry of mythological geography, serving as both a cautionary tale and a tantalizing mystery. The medieval period saw a relative decline in interest, as European thought turned inward under the influence of Christian theology. Yet Atlantis did not vanish. Instead, it transformed, absorbed into legends of biblical floods and apocryphal histories of antediluvian civilizations. Medieval scholars sometimes connected Atlantis to Noah's flood, interpreting it as part of a broader narrative of divine judgment on human pride. In this way, Atlantis was reinterpreted within a Christian framework, linking it to universal themes of sin, punishment, and redemption. The rediscovery of classical texts during the Renaissance revived interest in Atlantis with fresh intensity. Humanists, explorers, and scientists alike became fascinated by Plato's account, treating it not just as allegory but as a possible record of real geography. The timing was significant. Europe was entering the age of exploration. As sailors ventured beyond the familiar coasts of Europe, they encountered vast new lands across the Atlantic Ocean. For many, this seemed to confirm Plato's claim that a great land once existed beyond the Pillars of Heracles. The Americas themselves were sometimes interpreted as remnants of Atlantis, their civilizations seen as echoes of a forgotten past. The Atlantis myth thus fueled both imagination and ambition. Explorers sought it as they mapped the New World, while philosophers used it to speculate about humanity's origins. In 1627, the English philosopher Francis Bacon published The New Atlantis, a utopian vision of a society founded on scientific knowledge and discovery. Though fictional, Bacon's work revealed the power of Atlantis as a cultural template. It could be reinvented to reflect not only fears of downfall, but also hopes for progress and enlightenment. The Enlightenment and 19th century brought new dimensions to Atlantis's cultural significance. As scientific methods of archaeology and geology developed, scholars began to search for tangible evidence of lost civilizations. This was the era of grand discoveries. Ancient cities like Troy, Nineveh, and Pompeii were unearthed, demonstrating that legends could indeed conceal historical truths. Against this backdrop, the possibility of Atlantis being real gained renewed plausibility. Writers such as Ignatius Donnelly popularized the theory that Atlantis had been the mother civilization of all others, a hub of technology and culture that spread across the globe before vanishing in catastrophe. Donnelly's influential 1882 book Atlantis, The antediluvian world argued that ancient myths, technologies, and architectural styles shared across continents were evidence of Atlantean influence. Though his claims lacked scientific rigor, his ideas captured the public imagination and became foundational for much of the pseudo-archaeology that followed. Atlantis was no longer just Plato's moral allegory. It was a global mystery, a lost source of human knowledge, perhaps even a key to understanding the origins of civilization itself. In the 20th century, Atlantis evolved further, entering the realms of pseudoscience, esotericism, and popular culture. Theosophists such as Helena Blavatsky wove Atlantis into elaborate cosmologies, describing it as a stage in humanity's spiritual evolution. Edgar Cayce, the American mystic, claimed to channel visions of Atlantis, prophesying its rediscovery and describing it as a technologically advanced society. These mystical interpretations shifted Atlantis from the domain of history into the realm of mythic archetype, linking it to humanity's longing for hidden wisdom and lost golden ages. At the same time, Atlantis became a staple of literature, film, and media. From Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea to Disney's Atlantis, The Lost Empire, the myth inspired countless works of imagination. In comic books, Atlantis appeared as the underwater kingdom of superheroes. In science fiction, it was reimagined as evidence of ancient aliens or advanced technologies. These popular retellings may bear little resemblance to Plato's dialogues, but they demonstrate the extraordinary flexibility of the Atlantis myth, its ability to be reinvented for each new era, medium, and cultural need. Beyond entertainment, Atlantis has served as a powerful metaphor for contemporary anxieties. In times of war, it has symbolized civilizations destroyed by conflict. In times of ecological concern, it has been invoked as a warning about rising seas and environmental collapse. In the nuclear age, it was imagined as a civilization destroyed by its own technological hubris. Each generation finds in Atlantis a reflection of its greatest hopes and fears, reshaping the story to fit modern narratives. Perhaps most importantly, Atlantis persists because it speaks to a universal human experience, the awareness of impermanence. Civilizations rise, flourish, and decline. Cities are built, destroyed, and forgotten. Atlantis condenses this truth into a single dramatic image, the mighty island swallowed by the sea. It captures the fragility of human achievement, the tension between creation and destruction, memory and oblivion. Whether viewed as literal history, philosophical allegory, or cultural myth, Atlantis forces us to confront the question of what endures and what is lost when societies fall. Today, Atlantis remains both an object of scholarly debate and a vibrant part of global imagination. Archaeologists dismiss the idea of a continent-sized Atlantis, yet continue to study real ancient disasters and lost settlements that may have inspired the myth. Meanwhile, storytellers, filmmakers, and spiritual seekers reinvent Atlantis for new audiences, ensuring that its legacy remains alive. In academic circles, the study of Atlantis reveals more about the evolution of ideas, myths, and cultural anxieties than about any one lost city. In popular culture, it endures as the ultimate symbol of mystery, a reminder that even the greatest civilizations can vanish, leaving only questions in their wake. Thus, Atlantis is more than a story about the past. It is a lens through which humanity views itself. It is a stage where fears of collapse, desires for lost wisdom, and dreams of rediscovery all converge. Like a mirror held up to history, it reflects both who we were and who we are. Whether Atlantis existed or not may be less important than why its myth persists and what it tells us about our timeless search for meaning, continuity, and hope in the face of uncertainty. As we reach the end of our exploration, one truth emerges with clarity. Atlantis is far more than a question of geography or archaeology. It is, at its core, a story about human civilization itself, its ambitions, its achievements, and its vulnerabilities. Plato gave us Atlantis as an allegory, a tool for reflecting on the dangers of arrogance, greed, and unchecked power. His dialogues contrasted the imagined hubris of Atlantis with the disciplined virtue of an idealized Athens. Whether or not he believed Atlantis to be real is ultimately less significant than the way he used the story to illuminate truths about the human condition. Through Plato, Atlantis became not just a lost island, but a lesson in philosophy. Greatness without humility leads to downfall. Yet over the centuries, the myth escaped Plato's control. Readers, scholars, and dreamers transformed his allegory into a mystery, a puzzle that seemed to hint at a real lost world. In doing so, they revealed another truth about human nature: our profound need to search for origins, to uncover hidden pasts, and to connect myths with the material world. This search has often stretched beyond reason, producing pseudo-archaeology, conspiracy theories, and speculative histories. But it has also inspired genuine curiosity, fueling exploration, science, and even advances in geology and oceanography. The legacy of Atlantis can therefore be divided into two intertwined strands. On one hand, it is a moral parable, a warning etched into cultural memory about the dangers of excess and decline. On the other, it is a cultural catalyst, driving centuries of imagination, exploration, and scholarship. Both strands, moral and imaginative, have kept Atlantis alive long after Plato's dialogues were first written. In modern times, Atlantis has come to symbolize our relationship with both the past and the future. It reminds us that civilizations are not eternal. Just as ancient empires fell, be it the Maya, the Romans, or the people of the Indus Valley, so too could ours. This sobering perspective gives the myth enduring relevance. In the face of climate change, resource depletion, and geopolitical tension, the vision of a once great society swallowed by the sea strikes a chilling chord. Atlantis warns us that progress, unchecked by wisdom, can lead not to triumph, but to tragedy. At the same time, Atlantis continues to inspire wonder. For some, it represents the possibility of lost knowledge, of ancient technologies waiting to be rediscovered. For others, it embodies the dream of utopia, a society of abundance and harmony lost to time. In popular culture, it remains a canvas upon which each generation paints its own hopes and fears. The Victorians saw it as the source of all civilizations. Mystics saw it as a stage in spiritual evolution. Modern storytellers recast it as a playground for adventure and discovery. This duality, warning and wonder, explains why Atlantis endures when so many other myths have faded. It offers both caution and possibility, both despair and hope. It is a myth flexible enough to adapt, yet profound enough to endure. And so, when we ask, did Atlantis exist? The answer may be less important than the questions it raises. What do we mean by a civilization? What makes societies thrive, and what causes them to collapse? How do we preserve knowledge, and how do we remember what is lost? Atlantis forces us to confront these timeless questions, urging us to look not only into the ocean depths, but also into ourselves. As we conclude this journey, let us return to the heart of the myth, a shining island, a great empire, swallowed by the sea. Whether real or allegorical, Atlantis remains a mirror of human history. It is a reminder that no matter how advanced, no matter how powerful, no civilization is immune to the forces of time, nature, and human folly. This perhaps is Atlantis's greatest legacy, not as a city to be found on a map, but as a story that reminds us of our fragility, our resilience, and our eternal longing for meaning in the face of impermanence. And so, the myth endures, an eternal island on the horizon of human imagination. You've just experienced the full story of Atlantis, its origins, its mysteries, and its legacy. But this is only one chapter in humanity's forgotten past. At Forgotten Civilization, we bring you deep dives into the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. Civilizations lost, stories buried, and truths waiting to be uncovered. If you found this journey fascinating, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Together, we'll continue exploring the echoes of civilizations that time tried to erase.